Hello and welcome to Mediator Musings. This podcast is a series of conversations with dispute resolution professionals. I'm Joanne Law, Director of Mediation Institute. If you are a mediator or other dispute resolution professional, I'd like to invite you to join our network. The Mediation Institute network is located at https://network.mediationinstitute.edu.au, or just go to mediationinstitute.edu.au and look for the icon. It's a free network for dispute resolution professionals throughout Australia. The Mediator Musings recording that you're about to listen to is with Rachel Clark. She's an experienced group facilitator who had recently become a mediator. I actually recorded this back in December, but with COVID and one thing and another, it's taken a little while to get the recording out for you. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Mediator Musings. Rachel Clark is an educator, facilitator, mediator, and community development practitioner. Sounds like you've got a fair few hats that you swap around there, Rachel.
I do.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, all of those roles are very focused on people and working with people. I guess to help the listeners have a bit more of an understanding of you, why do you do that? Why do you do the sort of work you do?
They are, you're right, Joanne, they are all about people, and they're about people fundamentally in group, apart from the mediator one, which as I'm new to, and that's about people in small groups, pairs, most likely. The education piece around teaching and training, the facilitation piece around training, and community development is about working with group structures. And so really that's been my guiding principle since university, when I started off becoming involved in facilitation essentially and community development work. And I did that because I came from a family where activism and organising was important, whether it be within a structure such as institutional organising, like teaching, like social work and politics. My grandmother was a local government politician, very influential in my life, or whether it be outside that in the sense of student politics, where you're organising people to get behind you. And I started that when I was 16. So yeah, I picked up where my family not left off, they were still doing it, but I took my inspiration from many of them and off I went.
So it sounds like there were lots of interesting dinner table conversations at your place and your extended family gatherings.
There really were. That was absolutely right. That was a sort of petri dish of my understanding about people and structures. There was a lot of political discussion, a lot of divergent political views. So we had people at both ends of the political spectrum within my immediate family. And so that was quite a lively and engaging space most of the time.
Yep. So you've really been in an apprenticeship for this group facilitation for quite a while.
Sure. And I think I had a fair bit of conflict in my formative years, some more productive than others. And I see conflict as a reality. For me, it's the presence of difference, and sometimes it gets ugly and sometimes it gets constructive. And I've experienced both, and I'm really committed to enhancing the people's capacities to have conflict that is constructive, where we can understand each other, because it's very painful to be stuck where it's bad for us as humans. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Entrenched conflict, even if it's not overt, even if it's not spoken about, it's very toxic. Just to help people understand a little bit, what sort of group facilitation have you been doing in the past?
I think group facilitation is so dear to my heart, Joanne, because I began it really early. So I think right from the very beginning as a 16-year-old, when I was involved in student politics, I put myself up for leadership positions, which I now look back on thinking, wow, there's a lot of chutzpah there. I think that speaks of my family dynamics around standing up and being counted. And I will freely admit it, back at that time, I was just having a go and I didn't understand the complexities and nuances, as you don't when you're 16, 17, 18, 19.
Everything's so clear at that age.
Yeah. I remember the room I was in, and I remember we were talking about something that was really important to our student union, and I must have been 17 maybe, and talking about why students don't don't get involved. And I remember saying the immortal words, something about because people are lazy. And I just so don't agree with that now. I understand why people don't get involved in a much more nuanced way. But I think back then I was like, you're either in it or you're not. You know, you're either lazy or you're...
Exactly.
So I forget your question. What was it again?
Oh, no, I was just wondering about what sort of group facilitation. So is there a particular type of...
Thank you. I remember that question now. Back then, really in that context, it was very much around campaigns and organising events as well, which really is community development. I didn't understand that at the time. I was always very keen to get people involved and active in their own communities. And back then, fast forward to university times, heading up one of the student groups, Community Action, as the chair. It was very much initially around student organisation and getting students involved in their own communities. And then that segued into working. When I first graduated, I worked in a community space, setting up a community resource centre. And that was very much servicing and serving the community adults with physical and sensory disabilities. And so we would get together as a team, and the team was mainly made of volunteers. I had one paid member of staff, and we were working out how we were going to serve our community. And that was my sort of entree into professional group work. And I remember one of the first things I did was run an assertiveness course. I didn't just run anybody's assertiveness course. I created my own assertiveness course. And of course, I didn't know what assertiveness was, so I had to research it. And so I think being involved in that really proactive, preventative community work has always been, which community development is. I started that straight away, and I started that at university and before, and it's been my sort of lifeblood all the way through. So that type of group work is around bringing people with you and listening to them. And I've become more aware, harnessing the capacity within the group to serve itself, essentially. Okay. And I've become more and more aware as I've gone through work of the incredible gift that is to a community to be part of something like that, but also the skills involved in doing that. And I can speak to that more if you want to.
You said something beautiful, harnessing the capacity of the group to serve themselves. That really resonated for me, because particularly in disadvantaged groups, it's often things are done to them or for them, which tends to be disempowering and validating that, yes, you're not good enough.
You don't have the skills.
You don't have the capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that, there's just a shiver as you say that, because that's exactly my work is around the empowerment piece. And it goes hand in hand with one's own empowerment. So interesting. And this idea that, and I'm also really interested in sort of flat hierarchies or no hierarchies. And that involves an enormous amount of personal responsibility, because there's nobody telling you what to do. It's can be much easier to sort of play to the structure, I'm just doing my job and people are telling me, whereas I'm much more interested in people taking responsibility for themselves and accountability for their actions.
That's right. I didn't think that was right, but they told me to do it, so I just did it.
That's it, because we all have moral and ethical responsibilities, and when we're able to enact them, I think that's a good thing. It's not always easy, but I think that leads to a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're relatively new as a mediator. I'm really fascinated about your perspective on mediation, coming from that deep background of working with groups. And I guess what attracted you to become a mediator?
Wow. Let's start with the second question. I might have to ask you to remind me of the first one. I've always been interested in mediation, and I think it does go back to that, the conflictual elements of some of my former experiences, and seeing how damaging but also enlivening the points of difference can be. So there's those two pieces around when it's handled well and when it's not handled well. And I think I've always used communication as my key toolbox right from the get-go, and saw that I had the capacities and the interest to navigate the complexities of this communication minefield that is being a human being in a sentient body, and supporting other people to do that. And the teaching is really an extension of that. It's the working, it's how to share ideas, and then how to have how to manage differences of opinions, and to do that in a safe and transparent way so that we all come out with greater clarity than we went in, and without our boundaries being broached. And that's a challenging one. So yeah, I think it's around supporting people to communicate more clearly, because I think that's healthier and more productive.
Yeah.
I think that's what led me to mediation. I think your first question was, how did I find it?
I guess the expectations, it's always interesting with someone who's new, because you come with certain expectations. And I know the themes of trust and safety are ones that I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
In that as well.
Absolutely. I think the analogy for me would be, I think it's more a metaphor, the putting on a warm cloak or getting in a warm bath. It felt like it was the right way to use my skill set, and I really enjoyed the structure of it. And I think group work provides that as well. I think there are many similarities. Size is a difference, but many similarities. Group work, well facilitated, is a structured experience.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, it's a free-for-all and it's not safe. And
yeah, that's right.
Understand why they're there. And then people try and take control. And there's this whole lived out dance of roles that we play unless it's really clear. And so I really enjoyed experiencing the stepped approach of it, and how that provided me clarity as the trainee facilitator, but also safety and trust in the experience and the holding by an experienced mediator / facilitated process. So I felt it was a really useful, and it felt right. I also really appreciated the co-created nature of it. So for me, whilst I have all sorts of ideas, which I try not to inflict too vigorously on other people, I also thoroughly enjoy the generative space of co-creation. And that's a bit of a buzzword, I know, but I think we've all experienced, or hopefully we've all experienced, that wonderful space where something new has emerged out of two people or more than two people coming together, because there's been listening and deep listening and understanding, and probably a lot of compassion and commitment. And that's on the really positive end of it, where ideas can be created that weren't there before, or products can be created, or artwork, or whatever. And I think that co-created space is a really interesting, and one I'm passionate about being involved in. And I see that in mediation. It's with a different lens, because people arrive in deep conflict, but the possibilities of emerging with greater empathy, that's the goal. Yes. Understanding of each other speaks to how well it was mediated, how many things, but how that co-creation was possible or not.
Yeah. Okay. I'm hearing from you about the clarity, which is something that it seems like you're seeing as a real similarity between working with groups and trying to bring clarity and a common understanding, not necessarily an agreement, but an understanding of each other's perspectives, and that power of acknowledgement, I think, was coming to mind in what you were saying.
For sure. I think at best an acknowledgement of another person's worth, of their perspective at very best. I think what also reminds me, and I'm thinking about my other piece of experience as an English language teacher, which was incredibly important in my communication arc of development, around this meaning making, and how we all make meaning, and how we can be saying the same words and have completely different understandings of them. And that becomes really apparent when you're teaching somebody another language, and how do we understand what this emotion is for somebody, and the depths of it, and where it comes up. And so I see that trying to move through the fog, which is often our lived experience of emotion and desire and commitment and responsibility and all the things of being a human, and trying to make sense of it, trying to put meaning to it, and trying to give people who haven't had the experience or the opportunity to and this is coming from a strengths-based perspective, which we can also talk about, seeing people as lifelong learners, as with the possibility of learning these skills, and how enhanced their life would be if they were able to develop more language around themselves and other people's experience.
I think that's a really important point for anyone listening, that reminder that language isn't universal. Even when we're using the same words, the meanings aren't necessarily the same. And when you've learnt or taught a second language, it comes home to you very clearly. I've had that experience as well. And as mediators, just those extra couple of questions, asking people, what do you mean by that? What does being a good parent mean? What does being a good neighbour mean? What's behind those values-laden words or those emotion-laden words? Because it's almost guaranteed different.
And that reminds me of my passion for my early theoretical learning around sociology and anthropology, and my fascination with culture, and my current sort of teaching around culture and communication and diversity. And we are enculturated into cultural expectations, and we're given some language around that, and then we're left to work it out.
Yeah.
And when we come up against struggle or internal or external struggle, we're often without explanation, and yet we have these constrictions around us, around our expectations. So being a good parent is important, of course, but what does that mean? And what does your family think that means? And what does your community think that means? And what do you internally really think that means? And this is the work I'm interested in doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's very much part of the role of a mediator, of helping people to translate meaning and get them open and clear, and not from a judgmental point of view, that your definition is better or superior or anything other than different to someone else's, and how can they be reconciled to coexist. Or in some cases there are issues, and how can that be realised and changes made.
And that's right. And with that, an acknowledgement of the impact of actions, and how important it is to redress, hurts done and boundaries crossed.
Yeah, because that issue of power and exploration of power in individuals and groups is something that you highlighted as being really of interest to you, and that particularly that distinction between power over and power with. Do you want to maybe explain what you mean by that?
For sure. It's a really fundamental concept of working with vulnerable people, but people experiencing a whole range of vulnerabilities, marginalizations. And within that, we can include people who are experiencing homelessness, young people, people who use alcohol and other drugs. It's a whole range of vulnerabilities. And when doing so, it's very easy as a worker, this is from my worker perspective, to step into a power over, which is telling somebody what the best thing to do is, which is using one's authority and the status granted by your position, by the fact that you're not a service user, to at worst get an ego trip, or at best tell somebody what to do, because you think that's the right way. And I think there's a lot of poor practice and unexplored and unexamined practice, and you can see that from politicians to people that we meet in positions of power and authority who use power over and don't think twice about it. So
that's right.
I don't know.
Everybody does it. That's just how it happens. There's those sorts of rationalizations.
I think it's a very human response to want to have control, and it takes a lot of personal work to recognize when we're exerting personal control that we don't need to. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it keeps us safe, and those things, as we can explore different vulnerabilities, we recognize the importance of that and being able to draw clear boundaries and say, no, that's not what you can do, etc. But unless it's been examined, and if you are in a position of authority, then power over is a command control approach. It's a very old-fashioned, it's I speak, you listen, do as I say, don't question. And that model is fairly militaristic. It comes from a very patriarchal perspective of there's one person and that's me in the room. And our institutions respond accordingly. I've taught in schools and I don't, the systems are set up to still have power over. And that's something that was problematic for me. working in groups, if you're going to have power over, then it's a real problem, because group work is around sharing of power, and that's where power with comes in, is that you're explicitly stating power. So as a facilitator, I have power because I'm calling everybody, you're stopping and listening when I'm speaking, etc. But we're actually going to attempt to share this power, because when we do share it, we are all more empowered, and as a result, we will get better outcomes. There's a lot to say about that, but essentially I think those are the two.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting observation. And in mediation, it's something that we have to continually remind ourselves that we have a lot of power in the room as the mediator, particularly if we're doing facilitative or the evaluative end of the spectrum. We have immense power, not to prescribe the outcome. We can't force people to an agreement, but we do have the power to coerce people into thinking they don't have options. If we're not aware of that, if we're not aware that the people may not have the strength, or they may have a cultural or personal learned or whatever behaviour to cede to power, then they may have avoidance strategies or accommodate.
That's right. Again, going back to sociological perspectives, we are trained to cede to power.
It's a survival strategy that is often needed, and unfortunately in many people's lives they've had to survive in that way.
It's an organising principle, and yet it's not the only one. And I think that the middle ground, from what I understand around mediation, is really, yes, as a mediator, it's really important to maintain the space of safety and build that trust through clarity and through a very clear holding, so that nobody exploit, and that a potential agreement can be reached at the end through this careful holding. But then I think the skill, and this is what I noticed in my training, is that the skill is that facilitatory skill, is really the teasing out of those ideas between people and getting them to start talking to each other and clarifying perspectives and supporting them to be able to do that. So power is a shared process.
Absolutely, yeah. And in a really good mediation, you come out and the person says, "Oh, what did the mediator do?" "Oh, they didn't really do anything." They started with no hope at all that there was going to be an agreement. In the end, they do, and mediator, they didn't do much. But because they have transferred the power and created that environment where the people have been able to do the work they needed to reach that co-creation that you talked about before.
That's right. It's the same thing in the classroom or in a group as well. There is that transfer of power when somebody feels that they have the skills and they trust the situation, and then their own motor can start working. That's a really joyful thing to witness.
Yeah, I agree. In whatever context, it's a very wonderful thing. I guess I'm aware that you've recently moved and probably are in a bit of flux in your career at the moment. So where to from now? What's the future look like for Rachel Clark?
Goodness me. I have embarked on this brave and courageous journey of mediation. And so I'm really looking forward in 2022 to leaning into that and exploring and applying my community lens to potentially community disputes, and recognizing the importance of that. I've worked as I said before, in the proactive space of bringing people together in not only groups, as I talked about earlier, but also one-off groups where people can come together and trust that they can share it in a really safe way. So that's been some of my work as well, through running of events. But I was musing recently around how much we need to develop our skills of conversation and talking about difficult things in a way that is conversational, as has been evidenced by the enormously polarizing perspective of vaccines, but also before that, Trump, climate change. It's just a long list of topics that have caused enormous consternation. And I'm really interested in how we might be able to come together and have gentle conversations.
Yeah.
That are around being able to hear other people's perspectives. So I've been musing on that of late, knowing what a gift that is when we're really able to hear another person's perspective way before we get into any heated discussion with them, or in that, by that time, conflict.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's me not occupying my thoughts, but I'm also really here to develop my practice in that small space of, in that large space, but in the small number of people space, in the paired space, and to really consolidate my learnings from the course that I did with you. So yeah, looking forward to it.
No, it's very exciting. I'm just mindful of time. So I guess, are there any final thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would. I think something that's been really important to me in recent years is personal learning, and that speaks to that sort of the unlearning of both our educational experiences, maybe our family of origin experiences, maybe our early adulthood experiences, now late adulthood experiences, but that opportunity to reflect through, whether it be therapeutic processes or whether it be personal development or professional development. I'm really big on both of those, all of those elements. And I think one of the key elements of powerful group work is that before you can facilitate others, you have to be able to facilitate yourself. And that's trickier than it sounds, isn't it?
Yes.
So when I have a visceral response to a presentation of somebody, that is pushing one of my buttons from a previous experience of all sorts of natures. Could be from anything from not very serious to really quite serious. And often we can, as experienced facilitators or experienced community service workers or experienced social workers, counsellors, whatever, we can go into professional management of that, and hopefully nobody else recognises. But there's some work that's happening within us that may be unrecognised or damaging, and that can obviously lead to burnout, vicarious trauma, all sorts of things. I think the thing that I'm super interested in is putting the time and work in, and I have been doing that, to really understand myself so that I'm able to facilitate myself first before I am the safest person I can be in that role. So I think that's a call out to people who are listening to think about what that might be for them. And there are so many ways that you can approach that, but to give yourself some time, if you're able to, some space to really get, and some self-compassion and self-commitment to be able to nurture yourself in a way that you can then do the work that you need to do in the world.
That's very profound. And as you're talking about that, it's summer in Australia, so it made me think of cicadas. When they're growing, they have to shed their shell, and they're vulnerable for a little while they're still growing their new shell, but it's the only way to continue to grow and let go of the old.
I love it. And that connects back to, and I think that maybe to draw it full circle, when people are in particularly challenging situations, when they're putting themselves, say, through mediation, and if they're going to move towards an agreement, there's going to be vulnerability on display, some level of vulnerability, and to really honour the bravery that it takes to do that, and having through personal knowledge of how hard it is. And I see myself as that lifelong learner, and I encourage other people to do the same. And obviously our clients that are on the other side of the table or computer screen, where they're really in strife and it's very painful, and honouring the vulnerability it takes to step into that place and try and find a middle way is inspiring. And
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think and it's a real reminder that we need to not other the clients, like we need to recognise our shared humanity with them. So as a mediator, yes, we need to keep a certain level of aloofness, but that doesn't mean lacking empathy, lacking understanding, not understanding the need to honour the vulnerability that it takes for someone to step away from a rigid position they've been holding, for example, and create an environment where it's not losing face, it's actually finding a new understanding.
Absolutely.
Totally different meaning.
and growing as the cicadas do.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a joy, and that self-care is something that I think really critical for any professional that works, well, anyone, but particularly professionals that work with other people, where you come across a lot of people that have trauma, that are still in trauma, that may have problems that you're not in a role you're able to provide the help they need. All of that is really difficult. In one of my groups, someone was trying to make a decision about a mandatory report, an FDR practitioner. All of these things, should I report? Is it going to make the report? Talk to the specialists. These are not decisions we need to make on our own. And as if something's keeping you spinning,
that's right. That's absolutely it. And honing that ethical lens and duty of care lens is a critical thing. Yeah, absolutely. There are other people. You are not the savior of the situation. You do not hold the responsibility to handle this on your own. That's not the path forward. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also that sense of, as an early practitioner in my career, I think I had a very unreconstructed view around being in a situation where I was just doing the best for everybody, and I was trying, but there is that sense of, there's a sort of savior element to it, and it's the charity model, and it's wholly, for me, it's now the complete, that is not what it's about at all. I'm part of this ecosystem. I have different skills that I can bring to bear. I have ethical responsibilities, and I have as many human vulnerabilities as the next person. So it's making sure I take responsibility for those, and also follow my own professional practice responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point to end. Don't let go of the need to be a saviour, and look at how do you support and empower people with the processes you provide. Yeah, that's a fabulous message, particularly at this time in the world. Yeah, so look, I'm mindful of time. I really appreciate you making the time for this chat, and I've absolutely loved talking about some of these topics. We could talk all day.
Could indeed.
Easily. Very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, well, thank you once again.
Thank you, Joanne.
I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. So follow Mediator Musings podcast to hear future recordings, and also check out our new podcast for the International Mediation Awareness Week. That podcast is called the IMAW podcast. If you're listening to this podcast on a platform where you can, please make a comment and let us know what resonated with you.